Welcome to the podcast where we track down Australian war veterans, have a chat with them, and hear their stories. I'm Alex Lloyd, and this is Life on the Line.
They were building positions in there
if
for
anything
a
happened
fight.
to us, by the time anyone got to us,
I think it was chaos.
the weather was so bad there would be
I used to
nobody
run
left.
with boots full of blood.
And the next thing I hear was alarms,
Chances of
screaming.
survival were very, very slim.
The soldiers didn't want to go into the ambushes, so they'd send the kids in first. And so he was sent in first into an ambush and he got shot in the stomach.
It was very hard for me, very hard for my family.
And the plane burst into
Proud of the
flames.
crew, proud of what I've achieved and what I'm
To
doing.
volunteer for service was in effect to put your life on the line.
Chantel Taylor is a veteran of the British military. She's renowned for being the first British female soldier to kill an enemy combatant in close quarters. She's also author of the best-selling memoir, Battleworn. I spoke over Skype with Chantel about her life in uniform. Chantel, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you going?
Yeah, not so bad. As we just sort of alluded to, I'm still recovering from the weekend, but Tuesday now, so there's no excuse.
Chantel, let's go right back. Tell me a bit about your childhood.
I was the youngest of 5, so I had quite one of those sort of, I wouldn't say as sort of idyllic as the Griswolds, but we used to do quite a lot together because our ages are very similar. So you had like my oldest brother, then number 2, and then they went from 2 to 4 because my parents had twins. And then me, and we were all seemed to be, to put it into context, they had 5 kids by the time they were 25.
Wow.
So, yeah, so they must have then got a TV. I don't know what happened, but so I think that's just, back then it was kind of okay or it was normal to have bigger families. And mum's Irish, so maybe that's something to do with it as well. But my childhood was kind of, I grew up with 3 brothers and a sister. So, yeah, the usual stuff, getting beaten up by them, but not in a sort of way. Nothing was ever broken. I used to write, strangely enough, and that stopped when I got into the military, but I used to write like weird little poems and stuff just about, I was quite a deep kid. I used to do, the poems that I used to write were about like current affairs, which was quite strange. I was always very much into what was on the news. And I don't know, maybe that's my parents used to watch a lot of the news and stuff like that. So I think I used to get quite into it. And then I got into having an opinion pretty early.
When you were growing up, you would have also been heavily influenced, I imagine, by stories of your grandfather's service in the Korean War. He
was in the Royal Marines, and he was part of, because not many of ours went to Korea, so he was part of this sort of old and bold that were coming out of the Second World War, and then they made up this unit that went out to Korea. But most of my other uncles, they served within some sort of capacity within the Navy. But yeah, I did. It was almost one of those things, because he never really used to speak about Korea much. And I don't think many people did, and it wasn't really that well, I wouldn't say documented, but it was one of those.
It was a forgotten war.
Yeah, it was, which is really sad because that was the stuff that went on there was extremely intense, and for any war to be forgotten is really, really quite sad. And it just seems to happen, doesn't it? Like you have, for us, the Falklands War, Northern Ireland, we were there for 30 years and, people all over the world don't agree with certain things there. It's still, when it's on your doorstep and it's affecting you, it's still, still very much as a military, that's our interest at that time.
Well, I find that sad that your grandfather didn't share that many stories with you. I mean, he was a Royal Marine Commando, so he would have seen stuff, and I think they teamed up with the US Marines at one point.
Yeah, they did, yeah. But he was very, my dad says to me, because I don't really remember too much of my grandfather when I was young, and I don't know why, but my dad says I'm very similar to him, and we stand the same, and we kind of, that doesn't mean I stand like a man. It just means we stand very upright, and my personality is very similar to his. I get in trouble sometimes for having the wrong tone. That people say, it's not what you say, it's the way you say it. And he was very similar. And I think things like that, having not spent that much time with him, those things are handed down just by
nature,
the forces of nature, if you like. Yeah. And so even though I didn't spend hours and hours sat with my grandfather, I still picked up traits. It's brilliant. I'm really pleased that I did.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
But then since you didn't have that strong military in the back of your mind kind of presence when you were growing up, you didn't join the military straight away, did you?
No, I experienced the 90s first. I don't know if that was a good or a bad thing. But yeah, I went in. I was kind of. I want to say I was enjoying myself, but I'm kind of glad that I survived the 90s, because it was a bit in the UK. It got a bit naughty at times, and there was the inclusion of hard partying and along the things that come along with that are violence. So it was a bit rough in the UK then. But I survived it, and then I signed up. So I think the military saved me in some ways, because I was brought up on a council estate, and I always sort of promised myself I wasn't going to be a kid pushing a kid, i.e. like a child having a child type thing, because that was happening as well. Having a lot of young
mothers and
and it was. I just thought that's not going to be me.
Were you ever like a scrappy kind of kid, as in you're getting into fights?
I was really bad. Yeah. And because I think we used to sort of roam in gangs, and not the gangs that you see today, like where it gets a bit. The fights were always kind of just like physical fights, as you turn up, and there'd be some sort of gang fighting, but it didn't get to the point where people were getting acid thrown in their faces and the way that. So when I say that, I say it quite lightly, because generally people came away a little bit battered and bruised, but I'd like to say it was a bit more innocent. I remember still having bombed out churches from the war. So you had sort of these areas where I lived that you had remnants of World War II, which is crazy, isn't it, to think still in the 90s you had these bombed out areas. So they were usually the meeting grounds for these. And because I was one of the younger ones, I was always quite scared. So I had older brothers, so I was always looked after. But then it got to a point where I had to kind of like learn to look after myself. So yeah, I guess it's fair to say I became a bit scrappy.
Rebel child.
Yeah.
But then what inspires the decision to join the military?
Right, so my brother, he joined the infantry. He then obviously started to go away a lot.
Which number brother is this in the chain?
So he's number 3. So he's the youngest boy. So he's like the closest to my age. We still fight now, like we're 10. People laugh, actually, because like if we're in company and we'll just have like an argument, but it will literally be like we're back being kids again, because like I said, we're all really quite close in age-wise, so we're all quite feisty.
I don't think siblings ever grow up; they just get older.
Yeah, exactly. We're still. I'm trying to think of the last time we got physical. Yeah, so he was going away, and I remember thinking, I thought it was cool that he was going away, but I hadn't sort of got my head around that I was going to join, and then. I did a little bit of, because our Army Careers offices used to be quite, you could get to them. You could walk past and you could see the stuff in the window and things like that. And I just remember looking at it one day and I don't even know what I thought. I didn't even know what I wanted to be. I didn't sort of go in there thinking I wasn't a cadet. And then one day I said, right, I'm going to join the Army. And I said it purely out of, I wouldn't even say something to say, but I just said it. And then because I'd said it, I had to do it. It was one of those sorts of things. Because I couldn't face the embarrassment of saying, and this sounds really pathetic when I'm saying it out loud. But at that age, I couldn't sort of handle the thing of not doing something that I said I was going to do.
Well, that stubborn pride, I think, served you very well in the end.
Yeah, well, probably, I don't know. In some cases, it has.
Well, in the case of it steering you to actually commit to joining up, it certainly did.
Yeah.
When you're looking at the list of options, what were the list of options like for you as a young woman in the 90s, and what steers you towards choosing a medic?
Right, so the ones that because I didn't really understand what they were, and this is where I say about do your research. All I saw were words, So I seen a logistics driver. There was an artillery option, and I can't for the life of me think of what it was. It clearly wasn't the forward. Women can be forward observation officers now, but that wasn't there. And there was the old RMP, the military police. Clearly, I wasn't going to go down that line. And then there was combat medic. And again, this is there's a really simple reason why I joined, and it was the only role in the line that had the word combat in it. So I thought it sounded cool.
That's a great informed decision right there.
Do you see how that sort of, now that I insist on having an informed...
But it's significant because we'll get to it when you're actually being deployed, but it's a line from your book, which we'll also come back to, but you say the line, "We are soldiers who carry medical packs, not medics who carry weapons." And it seems, as I read that, I thought, well, that seems very obvious, but it was just such an effective description of, no, you're not someone waiting at the back. You are in the thick of it with everyone, which we'll get into specific stories, but you were really signing up for the heaviest stuff you could have possibly signed up for, I imagine, at that time.
Yeah, and even the strange thing about that is that for the roles or the tours that I went on, many years later, people's sort of perception of a medic was very much as you just described. That I would just stay in Camp Bastion, or you were just there you weren't really anywhere near the front. And I thought, well, actually, if you think about the name of the role itself, is called a combat medic. That kind of, to me, explains exactly what that role is. You don't, the words are there to see. Because I remember when people were sort of surprised at the stuff that I ended up being involved in, on the front line and stuff, that I thought, well, I don't know why you're surprised, because I wasn't surprised.
Are you expected to find yourself in the line of fire?
Yeah. If we were in that position. So at the time of joining, we weren't really going anywhere. Northern Ireland was still, that was sort of filtering off. And my first deployment was Kosovo. So, and again, it wasn't, the first taste of proper combat would come much later. But and that was my point. So back then, the role of a medic was very different, because we were kind of painting boxes. And I'll tell a story, and it still grosses me out, so bear with me. It's not, I don't like using these sort of words, but it was funny. I remember I was sort of going through our kit checklist for our boxes, our med section kind of boxes. And to this day, I never understand that we had, on our equipment checklist, we had a box of 25 vaginal speculums. I don't even like that word.
25.
Yeah, so you can see how far we've come. As in, I just, for the life of me, I thought, well, hang on, what war has ever said that you need? Why have you got these? And we had them. They were on our checklist, and they would go in our little sort of cages with all of our kit. And like I said, still to this day, I can't imagine the war that they were ever used.
Tell me about your training and how you found that.
Well, I'm not too sure that I thought I would really survive it, because I'd gone from being, I wasn't an unruly kid in the household. When my parents told me to be quiet, we were quite well disciplined in that respect.
Oh, so you could follow orders. That's useful.
Yeah, I could follow orders. But then when I went into this thing, and every sort of UK or barracks in the UK is miserable. It's cold. I was away from home, and I was just like, oh, this is shit. And I remember thinking, I didn't think that I'd survive. I don't mean survive as in the pain and stuff. I just thought, I don't know if I'm going to like this, because a lot of the people that were there were super keen. They'd been cadets, and I was just like, oh, this is. And I'd come from a very different. I'd been enjoying myself, and I'd worked since I'd left school. So I was like, well, I don't know if this is really going to be for me. So I kind of, again, out of sort of pride and sort of blind, because I couldn't really face like going home having failed. I guess I just sort of stuck out. I won't say that I was a super soldier or anything like that. I just kind of did my best to get through it and wake up every day. And because we were in a platoon of a mixed platoon, so there were men and women in my platoon, which is a good thing. We're all going to be medics, so we're all, you kind of have to get used to being around guys.
Which you were plenty used to from your childhood anyway.
Yeah, I was, and quite comfortable really. Like the guys, where we had these sort of platoon houses, all the medics were on the bottom floor, and then above us you had paratroopers were being trained. So we tended to get beasted by the PTIs, the core PTIs and stuff that would go into the army training facility would sort of beast everybody. You would go down to the PT school and people used to take quite a lot of pleasure in beasting the medics, I guess, getting their hands on some. But that's okay, that's what it's all about, isn't it? And then later on in my career, I would then go back as an instructor anyway. I'd served 2.5 years training recruits, so I got payback. It was good fun, actually, I must say. That was good.
Just before you undertake your first deployment to Kosovo, did you get a chance to go and home in uniform or show your grandfather? Was he proud?
Before I deployed, I see my grandfather at a wedding, and it's quite a sad story, actually. So he was, because he kept saying to my mum, who, and I look a bit like him, in that, as I say, when we stood together, he kept saying, who does she look like? And I don't know what, it was almost like it was quite a sweet thing to say, because my grandfather, he was, quite tall, and he always stood extremely proudly, he always wore his marine blazer and things like that. And he was extremely proud. And I remember I was in Kosovo on one of my early deployments, and I received a letter, and he'd give me little tips on trust no one, never turn your back on the enemy. And it was really quite funny, because at that time, just as a lowly medic, I used to just think, oh, there he goes. It's almost like that scenario of I'll never fight in a war that he fought in. That I did sort of smile at and thought, that's coming from an old sort of war dog. I'm never going to see that sort of stuff. And so I smiled in that way of, thanks, Grandad, but I'm not going to be in Korea anytime soon. And he died when I was in Kosovo. So that was, I guess he never, maybe if there's something happening there, if there's some sort of afterlife, maybe he did get to see me in a place that wasn't dissimilar to where he found himself. And I guess I came home. So I'm a great believer in that you do get some elements of people looking after you. And maybe that's just from a comfort perspective. Same with my brother, is that I've been in some really, really hairy situations and managed to always get home.
How did you find Kosovo?
Cold. Kosovo was my first look at how, when people say about, Russians and the Eastern Bloc are hard people, and you can see why. The living's quite, it's all very, kind of like in the middle of nowhere, and it's dark. It's a strange place. But Kosovo was a bit of an eye-opener for me, because it was the first time I'd see casualties in that sort of setting from either serious RTAs or from wounds inflicted by weapons. And then, the sort of a little bit of an introduction of how shit the world can be, when you're helping to sort out the mass graves and stuff where people have been murdered en masse. That was a bit of an eye-opener. So that was kind of an introduction that I probably wouldn't see the same anywhere else as I saw in Kosovo, because every theatre of operations is very different, but you take something from every one. I couldn't compare that with Iraq, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone. It's a different place. But it has, and you remember something from all of these theatres. So the one thing that I really took away from Kosovo was their bread. The smell of the bread in the morning. Everywhere you went, you could smell it was a distinctive smell. Yeah, that was a tour that was. It was like here's another thing that was quite funny about Kosovo. It was my first time of really hating stagging on. Being stood. I remember being sort of stood on a chicane and just becoming very aware that you're the sort of the last line of defence for the entire sort of medical squadron, and just being stood there and hating it, cold, but still in my head thinking you still have to stay switched on, because these are our vulnerable points. But again, with no experience of proper war, it's just you're almost like ticking these boxes in your head to think. But I do remember taking that quite seriously, because I'd been the gimp that I am. I did take that quite seriously, and then later in life, I'd remember sort of if people didn't take it quite as seriously as I did, I'd be pissed off. But then I wasn't like I was in trouble in the army sometimes, like everyone else. But I still had this sort of soldiering. I took it quite seriously.
And your next deployment is Africa. You mentioned Sierra Leone. Well, you also encounter some child combatants there as well. Yeah, and that was quite hard to deal with, because we had to then. Our role was to basically allow rebels to hand themselves in and to then offer them a different set of skills. So whether that was carpentry and stuff. So that my point coming is that you then had to listen to the stuff that they'd done. And some of the stories were just, kids being made to kill their entire family. And not just kids, that's the thing. It's terrible for kids to have to do that, but it's terrible for anyone to have to do that. But, men watching their wives being raped, their daughters, I think Sierra Leone sort of really prepared me for the rest of the shit that I might see, because it was quite hard going, but I really felt like I made a difference, and we made a difference as a team. Well, the shit changes for you when 9/11 happens. Where were you that day? Now, this is crazy town, because we were deep in the jungle at this point. I think we were up in the sort of Kenema, quite close to where the diamond mines and stuff are. So, and we're in this strange little village. Well, it wasn't strange. To look at you, it was like what you see on the films, like Blood Diamond. Yep. So picture that we're sat in a village like that, and we're just going about doing our admin. People are eating, and we listen to the BBC World Service, and it's almost like going back in time. You've got the radio on, and there's I think how many of us we had our force protection, which was about 15, and they were all Royal Marine Commandos, and then we had our team was, I'd like to say 6, the 6 of us. I hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Yeah, so we just all sat around having our brews, doing our normal admin, preparing for the day's work, and then it started to come across the radio, and it's really, really hard to explain how weird that was. It was almost like, I'm speechless now thinking about it.
you couldn't comprehend what was happening. And we're listening to this unfold on the radio. It was the strangest, a real surreal moment in my life.
When did you first get to see actual images or footage of it then?
So a week later, we all everyone raced into what you call the chow hall, and then and obviously, but if you think about a week later, so much more was happening. Yeah, and that was a strange moment again. And then everyone knew that the world was sort of changing. But again, for me personally, it wasn't something that I thought, because of the role of women at that time. I don't mind talking quite candidly about it. I kind of knew I'd deploy, but again, I didn't know how and how that would sort of unfold, because we were still very much in the, even as medics, and this isn't just women, but we didn't really come into our own until Iraq and Afghanistan.
Did you have any specific hopes though for a deployment or what you might get to do? Or?
Oh God, yeah, I was always, and this is another story actually, I don't think I covered in the book, is in between that time, so in between Sierra Leone and Iraq, we were stood to deploy to, in fact, obviously another significant thing happened, but I'll come on to that because it sort of ties in. Obviously then my brother was killed.
Yeah.
I lost Dave, and then I was posted down to what I thought was like one of the, not a great unit, because I needed to be closer to home. So I went on sort of 5 weeks compassionate leave. Then I came back and went to this unit. And I kind of, I don't mind admitting that, I drank quite a lot for a year. Drank too much for a year. I was just sort of trying to escape and do the completely normal behaviour, but it was behaviour that had to stop. And then, I still managed to soldier, but I knew that I wasn't, firing on all cylinders and stuff. And then a job came in that was to deploy to the Congo, the DRC, and it was basically to deploy to help do a recce for a landing strip for RSF guys to deploy. And I thought, I need to get on that. And at that point I needed to sort of deploy anywhere. I didn't care where it was. I needed to get away. And it's quite funny when you think about me as a kid, always sort of escaping things. So now I was having to escape my brother's death, which was I can only talk about it like this now because it's so long ago. But so that was a really interesting time, because although I was a mess, I wanted to deploy. So I was picked for the team, which I was really happy about, because no one wants to be the one left at home. And it was like a big deal. So we had a medical section, senior medical officer, and our little crew. So then we're on the all our kits packed, good to go. We get to Germany to pick up the engineer squadron, and then we're all going to fly to the Congo. So we debus from the Herc in Germany, and then my name gets called out. It's Lance Corporal Taylor. So I walk to the desk, and they say, you're not going to be taking any further part in this flight. So I was like, how so? Well, not. I didn't say it quite as politely as that.
I can imagine it was more colourful.
I was broken. It broke me, because I was being told that I wasn't deploying. No one would say why. Clearly I was the only female there, and no one would say why. They just said, you're no longer deploying on this. And it broke me, because I was like, I can't believe. And this is how crazy again this sounds. It was almost like that fear of missing out. I didn't want people going without me, and obviously I was escaping the death, and I needed to go. So that was another. I mean, it was a strange experience. So I got back to camp, and I went into my sergeant major's office, and I said, I can't sort of believe this is happening. Blah blah blah.
So you'd been messing around with the Congo, and you get the Iraq deployment. How do you feel about your potential role going there?
So when that came about, we'd done our normal pre-deployment. We were in the training cycle, so we'd been to Canada training on the prairie. Getting our sort of med sectionals is sort of an exercise that we do in the training cycle. And then when Iraq came in, it was almost like everyone was, people were quite excited by the prospect of going. And I don't know what sort of listeners will make of that, but when you join the military and you go through these different cycles of, we'd already started to deploy in different ways. The British military were involved in Rwanda. You guys were doing East Timor. Do you see what I'm saying? So we'd all been in this sort of cycle of, I'd like to call it, these deployments were important, but like for me personally, they weren't war fighting. They weren't.
Yeah, you've been training for so long, you finally want to utilise these skills.
Yeah, naively so. Because it maybe in a naive way, because it's not until you actually get there, appreciate a real war and learn to respect it, that you realise that, you still want to be there, but you feel very differently. It's not this sort of young, like foolish attitude of, hey, I'm off to Iraq, and then sort of treating it quite nonchalantly when actually it's a serious business.
But how's your psyche at this point then? Because you've had the shock of your brother, he's died in a civilian context. I mean, you've been not in a big war in that sense, but you've been on military deployments and seen some heinous atrocities, and you're desensitizing yourself to some of that, and then you get this complete left field shock close to home.
Yeah.
And you've been messed around with this deployment you didn't get, and now you're getting to go. Is it the distraction you need, or are you feeling better by the stage? Or?
Yes, it's exactly. And that's, I mean, that could have potentially been quite dangerous as well, because I knew, with things that were going on, my head probably wasn't in the best place it could be. And in some ways, looking back, my desperation of needing to get out there was, and I still, again, was trying to escape. And I wasn't really giving the deployment the sort of respect it deserved. And, but then having said that, I then go out there and, performed like to the best of my ability. And if anything, that Iraq tour had given me the sort of drying out that I needed. I mean, and this is the strange thing about these deployments is you don't, we go out there and people think, oh, you just deployed to Iraq, but people are carrying the weight of whatever's going on in their life at that moment. Although you're soldiers, you're still a person. You still have things, people still have mortgages to think about. And I know this sounds crazy, but that's just normal life, because nothing sort of stops. And when you're on deployment, you do have that escaping at that moment in time, but you still have to come home and deal with what's going on at home. And that, again, that's maybe where a lot of people can fall by the wayside or struggle.
Well, let's jump ahead to your first deployment to Afghanistan.
Right, so I was in the hospital for that one, and I just left. I did 2.5 years at a training establishment, so I'd been at training recruits. So my soldiering skills at that point were extremely high, because I had to go and do my skill at arms, which is your weapons instructor down at the infantry training centre in the Brecon Beacons. I'd also become a chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear warfare instructor. That was an interesting course. And when you train recruits, you have to make sure that your kit and equipment is absolutely, squared away, your soldiering ability is squared away, your map reading, all those things that, like I said, when I was a recruit, my skills were at an extremely high level. And I got promoted from there. So slowly but surely I was going through the ranks, and I left there a sergeant. So when I went on my first deployment, I was a sergeant. Now, on that first deployment, this was in 06 into Helmand. It was our first deployment into Helmand. It was 3 para battle group, and everyone deployed as normal, the sort of professional way that they would deploy. But I'm not too sure that everyone knew that what was to come would come.
Well, you're all finding your feet there together. Yeah,
because it was like a new. I mean, it was more of a peacekeeping, if you like. It was more to go and protect. No one thought what happened that year would happen. They thought we'd go in, we'd protect a few people, and then we'd come home. And then, some 10, 15 years later, guys are still coming home draped in the flag. So that was, I think, a shock to everybody, Afghanistan. My role there was very much a supportive role in the hospital. I was running, one of the senior NCOs running the admin cell. And again, it was my first look at casualties coming in from the battlefield, like proper casualties, and dealing with dealing with COs that had lost men. And that was, again, it was nowhere near as kinetic for me as the next tour, but it was definitely emotionally quite tough. Because you weren't part of the action, you were just seeing the after action. It was actually quite hard to deal with, because we had, I'd like to say, not long into that tour, we had 2 SF guys were killed, and their whole team came back in, and you could clearly see that they'd been through the mill. And then, and I'm handing them out bottles of water, and then trying to explain when they can go, where their guys have gone, as in at what part of the hospital, and and we'd lost guys. So that was quite an emotional tour. And then to add to that, my fiance at the time, and we were together from home, not from through the military. He was out on the ground in Sangin, in the sort of during the worst stage of the fighting. So sort of dealing with that, and all the other stuff going on, and dealing with these guys coming in, it was quite harrowing.
Are you chomping at the bit to be in a more active, out in the field kind of role at this point?
Yeah, definitely. Maybe for what was to come, I needed the year that I had when we got back, because when that tour had finished, I then went on a few other courses that I had no business being on. I was an urban operations advisor, so I'd gone and done all my FIBUA training, and it wasn't to learn to fight, it was more to learn how to get casualties out. And especially as a senior NCO in that position, you're no longer just a medic. You're a med commander, so you're in command of medics, and then you're the company commander's advisor on the ground is how, if it's safe to get casualties out, and all those other decisions that you make at a higher level. And so when I went back to Afghanistan the second time, I was extremely well qualified. I didn't go in there blind. I was ready for whatever was coming. Because that first tour of Afghanistan, I'd seen some of the realities of war, the other end, maybe not at the sharp end, but I'd seen what was coming through the door and the reality of where my place was and how important it was that I needed to get those decisions right.
Let's jump to your second tour in Afghanistan in 2008. Where are you operating in the country?
Right, so I was pushed out as the section med commander down to Lashkar region. So we're in Helmand still. I wouldn't say a great deal was happening. It was relatively quiet. And the interesting thing is we had a film crew with us that tour, and they were almost it was days after they left, it all kicked off. And in some ways, I'm glad about that because. I don't know. I think sometimes, it's good to document things, but those times are, I don't know. It's not a bad thing that they weren't there with the stuff that I think they can add pressure to commanders on the ground, and I think maybe we've got into that sort of phase where we want to, people don't need to see that because I think people at home become desensitized to war, and then it's almost not such a big deal when it is a big deal.
You were deployed with quite a lot of jocks, so I'm sure you got plenty of funny stories out of that.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, and my mum's Irish. She's from the south, but she's got a really posh Scottish accent because she was then spent most of her adulthood in Scotland. So yeah, I know Scots people really well, and I get the humour. So we had a hilarious at times with them. And the interesting thing is, and I don't know whether it's fate, but so we had 3 guys in the company that were also recruits when I was as a training instructor. And one of them was in my platoon. So it just goes to show you how, by this strange twist of fate, I was now supporting them as a medic, having been a full corporal instructor when they were private soldiers. And I remember them when they were probably when they were these little oiks, as I call them. They were these little wretches, 16 years old, horrible. And so there we were out on patrol together.
Help me paint a picture of a day in the life of Sergeant Chantelle Taylor. Walk me through an ordinary day you would have had there.
So there are 2 types of days. So the one that was in when we were in the main operating base, which is the same. In our place, we had Brigade HQ, so you had the brigade commander and all of the desk officers. So there would be, you'd get up, do some sort of PT, get showered, go eat breakfast, straight into the med centre, which is we had a med centre plus because we would take local national casualties as a way of dispersing them and not creating backlog in Bastion. And then we could then send them off to Bost Hospital, which was not far from our location. And then, as boring as it sounds, you do your daily sick call, sick parade. And again, I became quite rigid with that. As if people didn't come in on time, just because you're on ops, you do keep a bit of a grip on discipline. And it's not and funnily enough, it's not the guys that are out on the ground that lack discipline. It's what I call, people that don't really need to be missing timings. Does that make sense? It'll be the people that just can't be bothered and they've not been out on the ground. It's like, well, so why do you feel that it's okay for you to come in at whatever time you like? And I'll be stood here waiting, So anyway, I was still a bit rigid. And then again, life in that sort of main operating base, our desk officer was away, so I had to man the brigade desk, which was a big deal for a sergeant because it's normally manned by a major. And it would just obviously be my luck that we had a mass casualty incident involving local nationals. And then I learned a sharp sort of lesson at the strategic level of how to learn how to deploy assets, whether they be Casbirds. We know that if a Casbird goes out, it's going out with Apaches, and it's having the sort of the confidence to make the decision and the right decision to get casualties off the ground without putting too many people in danger, because these are these sort of assets are worth a lot of money, and as sad as this sounds, that's important if you don't have many of them. If we don't have an endless number of Chinook helicopters, you can't just sort of deploy things willy-nilly. So that was a testing day, but again, not quite as exciting as the sort of my normal day in Nadi Ali. So I guess we had a few incidences occur. I had junior medics under me that would go out and do the patrols with the guys because that's their role. And again, it's remembering your role. So my role is a med commander now. on foot patrol with the guys, because that's what the rank structure is for. And it's not to say I didn't want to, but it's just, again...
Did you feel a bit robbed, though, because you'd been in the hospital the previous two?
Yeah, I felt really robbed, but it's all right, because I wasn't robbed, as was sort of later revealed, but I did, because I felt like I'd missed my... Although my junior medic days were in places like Sierra Leone, where I'd learnt my craft of looking after guys, looking after myself on the ground, but they weren't kinetic. So it wasn't a kinetic patrol, even though it could have turned kinetic really quickly. But so here I was, the med commander, and we had a few major incidences, and then an incident came in where the senior medic, who was a full screw for the fighting company, he was injured. So I was like, right, okay. And I wasn't reluctant, but I thought, well, it just wasn't, it was no longer my role. So I was like, right, I'll go. You know, that was where I then had to step in and fill his shoes. And then I didn't look back after that. Because what happened, my first patrol was into Lashkar Gah, which we have, when guys go through RIP processes, which is the relief in place, when new units come in, we have their officers come in and we take them on different patrols around their AO. So that was the first. It was, there was not much, not a great deal happening. And then the Marja thing happened.
It does. Well, let's talk through that fateful patrol, Chantelle. And I mean, you are renowned as the first female British soldier to kill an enemy combatant in close quarters. Tell me about that day.
I've told this story so many times. I'm just trying to think of where to start. So we'd been doing our little our patrol, and we were in our desert Liga, and we'd taken a little bit of incoming, but it wasn't sort of danger close. We were taking a few mortars, and there were a few sort of telltale signs that things weren't brilliant. We had a few cars going by at distance, but at high speed, full of the usual what we describe as fighting age males. And they were basically having a look at us. Because I was part of OC's TAC, the OC was in the front of my vehicle with his driver, me, his comms guy, and an interpreter in the back. And because there were two of us, we had the option of doing top cover from the top. And I opted to do that, because I don't think, some people will say, well, you're the medic, you stay in the back. Well, I'm not really adding any value back there, sat with the interpreter, because the vehicles that we were in, they wouldn't sustain any sort of harsh, the round. They would be infiltrated pretty quickly. So I just didn't really think I was adding any value. Just sat with my thumb up my ass in the back of a vehicle. And then also if something happens, I want to see what's going on. And I want a clear picture of if I'm the medic in charge of that battle space, i.e. medically, I need to know what's happening. And again, I think because of the courses that I'd done tactically, I was very aware of those things, and how important it is. So that day, we were then told part of the company went back. So we then went, obviously our numbers lowered again, and we were then told to go into Marja, and we needed to go into the district centre. So the stuff that we'd taken before, we just thought it was almost like a warning, as if to say, yeah, we know you're here, don't come sort of any closer. And that's like a red rag to a bull, isn't it? Because if you're getting sort of orders from higher, the things that were going on up country, that was what was deciding our fate. So in order for a mission to succeed, we were then being pushed into different areas. So all of that was good. And then we then got pushed into Marja, and then slowly but surely we started to patrol in our vehicles, stopping every so often at vulnerable points for guys to get out and debus and check do our normal up bomber drills, which is check vulnerable points for IEDs and stuff. And it wasn't long, the first IEDs found. So that's then, and that's a strange feeling, to find IEDs is always a good option, but it's when you just see how easy it is not to find them, because they're so well hidden. It's like the day would have gone very differently had we not have found that IED.
Just through luck.
Yeah, just through luck, and just through someone, spotting something that's out of the ordinary. And that's, again, that can be a gift within itself. It's certainly a gift for the patrol. I was very aware of the time. It was getting really hot, coming up to midday. And again, there was and like you said earlier about details, I remember details. So I always remember like washing on lines, and I was always like amazed in Afghan how people keep their whites so white. And that might be me being a girl, but how is it possible amongst all that dust and shite that all of a sudden people are still managing to cut around in this really white kit? Anyway, so but unfortunately you can't get close enough to the women to ask. But so yeah, you're just very aware of things that are going on, and sounds and smells. Smelling food because it's coming up to lunchtime. That amazing smell of bread again. And bread's like everyone's demon, isn't it? But it's like the nicest thing in the world. And I guess it's like comfort food. So then we get, we're sort of crossing the threshold of getting in there. And we're sort of, if you've ever been to Afghanistan, you get, when you commit to a route, it's very hard to uncommit, because generally you're going through like narrow channels, or if you're on the side of a canal, there's nowhere to go. So you have to, when it's on, it's on. So when you've committed, that's it. Regardless of what is happening, you're committed to that route, and you have to sort of then plan for. And again, my brain's then sort of thinking about, what if you get hit here? What's going to happen? And so you go through these little plans and options. So Kev and I, all the while, he's my other guy on top cover, and we're always messing around as soldiers do, cracking jokes and just generally fucking around, and I think that's just what soldiers do, because you're still concentrating on what you're doing, but in order to get over that waiting period, the calm before the storm, I think it's something that soldiers do just to get themselves out of feeling sick. Because I was very aware that I thought, right, if something's going to happen, I want it to happen, because at the minute I feel physically sick. That apprehension being, because you're in this sort of really eerie time and space where we were going relatively slow. And then we start to see, villagers start to run away from their homes, which is not a good sign. So it's like, right, well, so we're going through crossing these little thresholds of, right, everyone being really sort of switched on, something's going to happen. When's it going to happen, and who's getting hit first? And that's the unfortunate, like the real life scenario, that generally someone's getting hit first. Because it's not a case of if people start firing warning shots. We'd already had the warning shots in the mortar fire. So it's right, who's getting hit first and what are we getting hit with? And then obviously Kev sort of, again, with us messing around still to get over that nervousness, is saying, asking me to put a bet on of what we're going to get hit with first. I mean, only a jock could come out with that. So we commit to the canal track, and like all hell sort of breaks loose, and it's just all I can say that initial phase is just the sound is deafening. And again, when people think it's quite as easy as it goes off and your reactions are super quick, yeah, they are super quick, but your body still reacts to what's happening. So whether it's thunderous sound, smoke, you can react like in your own little space, but until you actually get eyes on things, eyes on enemy or the general direction from which they're firing, you have to still maintain control, of your little space. And that initial phase was, our instinct is to take cover, because we've got cover, we've got that. And although it's not the best cover, I mean, I could have been stood behind a sofa and it would have still felt like cover, even though it's not, because that's what something that looks like a solid object feels like. So it doesn't matter whether. Does that make sense?
Oh, it's psychological reassurance, even though the cushions are going to do nothing to stop.
But that's psychologically. So we take cover, and this is all happening like super quick, like split-second stuff. And I was just very aware of rounds pinging off our vehicle, and you couldn't see the rounds pinging, but you could see something in the air, and it was almost like little. The only way I can describe it is as if it was like little zip, there's like the weird little flies, but you can't see them, but you can almost just see
their impression on the air.
Yeah, and it's a strange thing. So I just became very aware very quickly that we were taking rounds, and that like I could see what I thought was, whether I was wrong in imagining it doesn't matter, because the outcome was good. But I just thought that's coming from my side. And having said that, Kev's side was the canal side anyway. So my side was where all the little compound houses were, and the sort of vegetation, the small amount that was there. And and again, tactically, this isn't because I was brave or anything. I just obviously popped back up, did what any other soldier would do, is just your reaction to effective enemy fire, which is generally to take cover and then assess and for want of a better phrase, like neutralize the threat the threat to me and my immediate space. And that's what happened. So I popped back up very quickly, and it, again, just by your own sort of scanning method, got eyes on the shooter that was engaging us, and that happened sort of real quick. 7 rounds later, which I obviously got a bit of a grilling for, although I don't mind saying this, like 7, it was 5.56, and generally like 5.56, unless you're lucky enough with a headshot, that wouldn't stop someone automatically. It depends on where you shoot them. We were always taught that the 5.56, unless it's in a particular style, is generally designed to maim and not kill, because it's better to take two or three out of the battle than just one. I mean, obviously it's very different from an AK.
I think it's also very different to judge 7 rounds.
Yeah.
When you're writing that at a desk as opposed to actually being fired upon.
I didn't mind it because I thought it was funny, and it's like, well, if it's 7 rounds. And the interesting thing about that is when we deployed to Iraq, and I speak about this to friends often, is that this is how poor a show. This is what they kind of thought of medics at the time, is that I deployed with less rounds than that when I crossed the line of departure into Iraq, and it took me 7 to kill somebody. So I kind of have done that math in my head and thought, that could have been interesting. So, I neutralised the threat. And then, and as quick as that happened, that seems like a long sort of period of time, but it wasn't, because at that stage, that's what everyone else was doing. They were reacting to effective enemy fire. So it turned out that we were being engaged from the rear and the left side. So it was just like an L-shaped ambush. But again, I'm so grateful for the tactical stuff I'd done pre that tour, because I knew, and I was very, very in tune with what my role was within that company. So what happened, we took a casualty, then that's no shock to anybody. The OC shouting through the back to me, Santi, we've got a casualty in the rear vehicle. Okay, I jump out the back door to run with him down the line of vehicles, and we get halfway. He tells me to turn around because someone's dealing with a casualty in that vehicle, which is always a gift, but it's not such a gift when you're running with your kit and in the heat and dealing with all the other stuff. But again, that's how quick things happen and move on. And then it was our role to get off the X, if you like. And by that stage, I think we'd put enough firepower down to contain what was happening. We then got the upper hand. So, but if I have to sort of reflect on that moment, I just think, well, I would never do things any differently. And if I added value as opposed to subtracting it, I'm happy.
After the contact wraps up, was the significance of what you'd done realised or remarked upon at the time?
Yeah, like Kev was laughing. Because then it went into that crazy. Yeah, because we go into that crazy. It's almost like quite childish. When you've survived contact, I think everyone has a bit of a giggle.
Oh, you release nervous laughter.
Yeah, it's like a bit, then it becomes quite hysterical. I remember Kev laughing at me because I was in and out of the vehicle. I was struggling to breathe because it was so hot. And I was just like, fuck it, because if you think of the way you're adrenaline, sort of rushing around the place, he was cracked up and he was laughing at the state of me, saying, and so I'm saying, right, okay, because I knew that my job hadn't finished because we had a casualty to deal with. So we were just, so he was sort of messing around. I didn't know, I don't mind saying I didn't really count the rounds. I knew I hadn't fired a full mag. So it was a case of sort my admin out, do those little bits that you would do after a contact and then wait for instruction to deal with this casualty. And then, I guess it wasn't really remarked upon properly until we got back to Lashkar because everyone had a job to do.
And how did that affect the rest of your tour?
I think, trust levels, especially not just from that, but from the way that we dealt with the casualty and got him airlifted pretty quickly because he was quite seriously injured, Chucky. He was the guy man in the 50 cal and he took a round to the abdomen. And I remember thinking, it was in the abdomen, but it was high. And I remember saying to the OC, he's going to be okay, but I'm very aware that may turn into a chest wound. We need to be sort of just be cognizant that he's good to go, but let's wait and see what comes back. And he then developed because it was high and he'd clipped the lining of one of his lungs, so he survived thankfully. But that then I think the trust that between myself and the command elements was super high then. So when it came to going to Nadi Ali, which was obviously the worst portion of our time, we were like I had a brilliant tour, and I didn't ever feel questioned. I didn't ever feel that I didn't belong there, or people really sort of valued our service. And even as I wasn't the only female there. There was myself, Abby, and Jenny, in Nadi Ali, and we had exactly the same for those two. We were sort of embraced as part of that company, and like I've said before, that was probably the pinnacle of my career. To have that level of trust from an infantry fighting company commander and then the guys that you were looking after. Yeah, it was quite something.
When you're on the plane heading home at the end of that deployment, how did you feel about the tour? And did you know it was going to be your last one?
Yeah, I did, because again, me and my other half at the time, we said I didn't feel I could go any further. And after that tour, I picked up promotion. I was recommended to go and be a TL for one of our SF med teams, which again would have been it was a huge honour to be recommended for that role. But I would never have been as kinetic, and I'm not saying that I should have been, but I would never have had the role that I did in Helmand. So I knew for me that was going to be the very best as a medic it would get for me. And I guess I just wanted to, because you pick and choose then. So I'd picked up promotion for staff sergeant. I would have gone into a more administrative role, because obviously as you go up the ranks as a medic, that's what happens. I was told that to go back to a training depot as a company sergeant major and do all those good things, but I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't finished. I didn't feel like I was finished, and I really enjoyed, hostile environments. I felt like I was good at it. I was good at being a medic in that environment. And maybe because I'd missed out the junior role and I'd done it as a sergeant. Yeah, maybe I was being greedy for hostile environment. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
You do discharge, and since then, you've gone into the private sector, and we could do a whole podcast on all the stuff you've been doing, leaving aside the security and secrecy issues. But I did want to give a brief shout out to the fact that you worked with the Australian ambassador in Iraq.
Yeah, I did 4 years with the Aussie Ambo. She was amazing. And, and funnily enough, I'd worked with guys, Robbie, he was ex-army medic, and when I left the army, we both deployed to Afghanistan working for DOS and DOD, the Americans, and we deployed together. So we were there in the same role, and then we'd go and work together on the same team, the ambassadors team. So that was pretty cool.
And this is with Lyndall Sachs.
Yeah, she was amazing. She was it was quite sad really, because for her tenure, that 4 years, we would travel the width and breadth of Iraq. We were all over the place, and she was achieving an awful lot, and then ISIS happened. So it was almost like the stuff that we were doing, you just give that a year later, there's no way you could have done that stuff. So, again, it was a privileged position to be the lead medic on her team. I mean, that was... And again, you're getting to know other militaries, and you do almost have to prove your worth again. And that's another thing, regardless of what you've done. I feel like every team that you come onto, even now, considering I've done an awful lot now, you still have to prove yourself. Sometimes that can be quite frustrating, especially if you're proving yourself to a nobber, someone who's, to be honest, you'd think, well, how about I look at your CV first? But it's no bad thing, because I always say you're only as good as your last fuck up. So, yeah, so that was a great time. And I've been doing an awful lot since, and I don't think, my story's not really ended yet, so I'm not really ready to...
No, I think we're just covering chapter 1, and then we'll have to chat another time on chapter 2.
Yeah.
Speaking of chapters, I've alluded to it a couple of times. You have written a memoir of your time in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and it was that was quite a cathartic exercise, and I did it all I didn't keep notes. I didn't take any notes on any tour. So, that was just, I wrote it. I made sure it got MOD clearance. I've got really good responses from the book, because I think initially, I struggled to get that book published because apparently, people didn't want to read a war story by a woman, but I think they failed to see that actually I wrote it as a soldier. The only thing that says that that's a woman is my name. So if that's the thing. If my story's not worthy as a soldier, then I think that's quite a poor reflection on society, because every soldier's story is worthy of being heard.
When and how did your story first really break and gain notoriety?
Oh, God. Right, so that was a funny thing. It was in a book. Sam Kiley wrote a book. He's the security editor for Sky News for the longest time, and then he went to CNN. But he wrote a book, and I was in it. And then, I guess no one really picked up the story, but it was there. And then I wrote my book, and I was in Baghdad at the time. And then all of a sudden, and I never expected this at all, because it had already been in a book. Why would I expect it to go crazy? Because it was already out there. So I didn't think, anything of it. And then the next thing, I got 5 pages in the mail. I was in every other paper the following day. I was on the news. And I thought, fuck, because I was working, and I was actually at the time, working in Baghdad, and I was thinking, oh my God, this isn't good, because I just wasn't expecting it to get that crazy. And it got, in fact, it was in one of your papers, one of the Adelaide papers, I think. And then it got as far as Thailand. It was in a section of the New York Times. So anyway, clearly I wasn't expecting that. And at the time, although there were pictures available of me, they were all military, and I tend to look quite different. You wouldn't see me in the street and think that's that girl. I look different, which is a good thing. So Yeah, so I didn't mind talking on the radio. That doesn't mean I've got a face for radio. This is what everyone was saying. But yeah, so I did a lot of radio interviews just to, talk about the incident and stuff, and that was it. And then I just sort of just let it go. I didn't want to go on the telly until the time that I went on the telly was when Sean Bean asked me to do a documentary. I thought, well, he's too cool not to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, God, if I'd have said no, that would be a bit silly. And plus, it was relative. So it was about the Battle of Waterloo and how medicine had it changed much, and I said not really. The basics of combat medicine done well, that's what really saves lives. And during that initial phase, and then for the skill of the surgeons, if you get complications, I mean, they're worth their weight in gold. So I think generally combat medicine's come along such a long way, but as I said, the basics are still, when they're done well, they're the best sort of lifesavers, in my opinion.
And Chantelle, to anyone listening, man or woman, who are aspiring perhaps to serve on the front lines, what advice do you have for them?
Don't let where you come from hold you back, and whether that's you're from a darker side or whether you're from a privileged background, go in and just enjoy what the military gives you. Because you know what, you don't realise what you get from the military until much later. Like I still am happy that the sort of person that I've become, and that's, by and large, by a lot of my military service, it's still, I've been out for nearly 10 years and I'm still very much, in fact, I'm probably more formidable because I've taken what they've given me and then I've just added all these other things to it. And I'm grateful. And I'm even grateful for the time that I've spent on operations, because it's almost like you go to a place that some people will never see, and they'll see it on TV. There's no better feeling in the world than feeling as needed as you do in a tight unit. The way that I felt when we had bad situations and you've got guys, men and women, looking at you and they want you to make the right decision for them, and you do, and that trust you for that split second, there's no better feeling in the world. Yeah, and I put that to maybe, the way that Olympians feel when they're up on the podium getting their gold medal. It must be that same feeling of pride that you have, because it's almost, I'll always stand for our national anthem. I'll respect, even our allies. And I go on massively about our Five Eye Alliance, which is, us, the Americans, you guys, New Zealand and Canada. We had this affiliation from the end of World War II, and I still strongly believe that. So if you want to have a strong sort of ethical presence and feel like you're worthy of that, then yeah, but by all means sign up. I don't think it's something that I would never look back. There's no negativity from me. Even at the times where the dark times, they've been worth it.
Okay, Chantelle, let's do the social media plugs. Where can people find you?
Oh, right, yeah. So on Instagram, I have Mission Critical is my military page, so where I push lots of the podcasting stuff out. And then Alternate RV is my sort of page. I'm not one for really, I don't post meals and shit like that. I haven't got any weird fitness routine that I'm trying to sell. I'm in my 40s now, so I'm just quite happy to be able to still function and still throw around a few kettlebells. So yeah, Alternate RV on Instagram. I've got my Facebook page, which is Battleworn. And yeah, I get messages from people all over the world for advice and stuff, and I'm always happy to answer. If people have questions, then yeah, feel free. Please don't send me gruesome pictures of yourself, because I will hunt you down.
And Alternate RV is spelled ALTERN numeral 8 RV. And they can also sometimes hear you co-host the Global Recon podcast, I should mention.
Yeah, and that's quite therapeutic. And do you know, I always actually enjoy listening. You'll notice in this podcast, I struggle to tell my own story, but I quite like listening to others. Because everyone else is I had Mark Donaldson on there, and he was just the most humble of beings. What a guy. I've been on that podcast a couple of times, nearly crying, which is just because you hear people, you just think, how have you ended up where you've ended up, But amazing, yeah. So again, just keeping the alliance strong.
Well, Chantelle, it's been fantastic speaking with you today. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you. Thank you.
That was my conversation with Chantelle Taylor. Look her up online and search for Battleworn, the memoir of a combat medic in Afghanistan, to get the full story of Chantelle's time in the line of fire. If you're just discovering us, we have a conversation with an Australian war veteran out every Tuesday. We also do bonus episodes like this conversation with Chantelle on Fridays. Subscribe to get all content. If you enjoyed this episode, then help us out by getting it out there to more people. Post the link on your social media and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and review. It only takes a moment and it really helps other people find the show. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We're at LOTL Pod on Twitter and at Life on the Line Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. Life on the Line is brought to you by Thistle Productions. Artwork by Big Cat Design, music by Dan Van Werkhoven. Thanks for listening, and lest we forget.